Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're going to be talking about gerrymandering and nonpartisan redistricting. And I'm talking with Brian Cannon, who's here in our studio, from OneVirginia2021, which is a nonprofit organization here in Virginia. It's 4 years old, and they have really been tackling the problem of gerrymandered districts. So welcome, Brian, to the show.
Okay, Catherine, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So this is interesting because we've just had an election, and I want to dig into that as we go through the show about gerrymandering and the many impacts that gerrymandering had in many different ways, both on why candidates decided to run, people who were activated, activists who got activated because they knew gerrymandering was a problem. But OneVirginia2021 is actually unique to Virginia.
Yes.
So please tell us, how did this come together 4 years ago?
Well, we're not the first to carry the torch on redistricting reform. There have been good groups that have been pushing for good government reforms like this for decades, like longer than I've been alive, like the League of Women Voters and other good groups. But the torch had kind of been passed over, maybe even dropped a little bit after the last redistricting fight in 2011, which was a real disappointment for those of us hoping for fair districts. But Lee Middleditch and Shannon Valentine and Bill Bowling and some folks from the far right and far left all joined together and created One Virginia. And the goal was simple. We believe these districts belong to Virginians, not to any party or politician. And if you can get on board with that, then we can have a conversation about doing redistricting better. Almost because you can't do it any worse than the way we do it today.
Do you think gerrymandering is a term that most Virginians or Americans recognize? Do you think at this point, or do we live in this political bubble where we just assume because we know what it is, everybody must know what it is?
Yeah, as a former high school history teacher, I think only people have like vague recollections of it not being a good thing. But I don't think people really know what it is. But the Wasson Center at CNU has a great poll that shows we've climbed about 10 points in the last 3 or 4 years. So hopefully our messaging and everybody else talking about this in the zeitgeist is really making a difference.
So gerrymandering, I mean, we can go into the history, but we won't. Okay. Gary Elbridge is the one that it's named for, but he's probably not the first person who engaged in it. It was probably a Virginian.
We have the first distinction, Patrick Henry, and it's Elbridge Gary, believe it or not. I mean, it's confusing
that's
as all
what it
these
is.
names.
Elbridge Gary.
Yeah, he signed the Declaration of Independence. He was a vice president of the United States and a governor, and all he gets known for is gerrymandering, which is unfortunate. But no, Patrick Henry has the honor of doing it first, and that's a ignoble distinction for a governor of Virginia, but that's what we're stuck with. He tried to put Madison and Monroe into the same congressional district, Virginia's 5th, which still looks horrible today. But he tried to put them both in so he could rig the election for Monroe. Didn't work out. Madison overcame it, but that was the first attempt at what would become to be known as gerrymandering.
Gerrymandering, and that's basically, so every 10 years we must redraw the lines based on census data. So people might be aware that every 10 years somebody sends something to their house or knocks on their door and says, I need to know how many people live here. And part of what that census data is used for is figuring out how to redraw the lines strictly around population.
Correct. This should be a very technocratic, super boring exercise. It should be people moved here, moved out of there, and we need to have our districts be approximately equal population, so we're going to adjust accordingly. Instead, politicians treat it like Christmas, and they're like, this is my chance to pick my voters and carve out people who might run against me. And so we take it from a really technical process, which what it should be, to a hyper-political process that it is today.
So our Virginia Constitution says the districts must be compact and contiguous. So I guess it comes down to what is your idea of compact? And contiguous can be a road.
Contiguous can be as wide as a road, yeah, and sometimes it is, right? It can also be across water, right? That's got to be a tricky spot for Virginia because we've got the Eastern Shore and things like that. No, compactness there are mathematical measurements for them. I don't think many people in the General Assembly know what those are, even though it's a constitutional requirement that these districts be compact. But you look at these districts and it's laughable if it weren't serious, right? And they're just the farthest from compact at all. And it's an embarrassment because that's at least one of the rules we have. It's not all that we should be doing, but it is at least one of the rules on the books. And A.E. Dick Howard, who was one of the writers of Virginia's Constitution in 1972, wrote in his notes on the Virginia Constitution, he put compactness in there specifically as a check on gerrymandering. So it's interesting that it's kind of the one thing that legislators ignore the most.
That's incredible. But you know, here's the thing. Unless somebody challenges that, I guess it doesn't, so it's like they're not compact, but no one's challenging the fact that they're not compact.
Yes.
Except now we have OneVirginia2021.
That's where we come in. Yes. So we've got a lawsuit. It's the first ever in its kind in Virginia's history. There are plenty of partisan lawsuits that have gone after partisan issues in gerrymandering in Virginia, whether it's racial gerrymandering or political gerrymandering, but we're the first group to ever sue on a bipartisan basis districts drawn by Republicans and Democrats, so both sides. We sued over 11 districts, 6 in the Senate, 5 in the House, an equal mix of both, over the lack of compactness in these districts. We want the General Assembly to set a real standard for it. They didn't. They forgot it was in there, and they put politics above a constitutional requirement, which is not a really sustainable way to treat your Constitution and not a good way to redistrict.
No, it's not. And and compactness too, I was very interested because there was an article not too long ago about mathematicians whose core math is geometry, I guess. Like, I took geometry, we all took geometry, and we're like, what do we ever use geometry for? But these mathematicians focused on geometry actually had a conference to talk about how you can use geometry to look at what compact means. Do you think there's something there?
I really do, and I went to that conference. It was at Tufts University, and having gone to a couple of redistricting conferences, this is the nerdiest of the nerdiest things I've ever done.
It sounds very nerdy.
But it's wonderful, and what was great about it is usually you go to these conferences, and I say this as a lawyer, there are too many lawyers in the room. And in this case, there were a ton of comp sci people, a bunch of math PhDs, folks that had expertise in this, and their whole premise of this conference was, we think we can help. Right? A lot of, leaving it up to a bunch of legislators, most of whom are lawyers, don't know what compactness means and don't know what the different measurements you could have mean to make an algorithm that could fix this. Now, they don't think an algorithm or a computer program can fix it completely, but they think they can contribute and get us further down the road than we are today.
Well, when people, because I have actually, had these conversations with people about the fact that our Constitution requires that the districts be compact. And they're like, but how would you define that? I said, it's a little bit like pornography. Like, I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. And I think it's the same thing when you look at a map of Virginia and you see some of these districts. It's like, I know that's not compact. Like, I can tell you it's not compact, even if I can't define what compact is.
You don't need a Tufts PhD to come and tell you that it's not compact. Yeah, which is why we're going to win. Why they're mathematically wrong. They're not. The districts aren't compact, but at a gut level, people know something's wrong, and that's why this movement's gained so much steam. That's why we're going to win. It's because at a gut level, people know that something's rotten in Denmark here.
But you have all kinds of people with all kinds of opinions, and so at the heart of this whole thing, and what we're asking for is a nonpartisan commission, because to ask legislators to draw their own districts is like asking foxes to guard a hen house.
Yes.
It's kind of like, and I've heard lots of suggestions about a commission made up of people from both parties. I'm like, no, that's what we're doing now.
We get a bipartisan gerrymander like we had.
Right, it's kind of like,
today.
no, I don't really see that as a solution. Oh, a few Republicans here, a few Democrats. No, actually I don't see that as a solution, because you still have what they believe to be, and here's another term, competitive districts. Just like, well, define compact for me, define competitive for me.
Yeah.
I really think that we need to look at some other, and we're not the only state to tackle this either.
No.
California, Ohio, Arizona, you probably know more than I do about the number of states that are already way farther down the road than we are.
Yeah, we're not a first mover, so we get to learn from all the others who did, and you can learn a lot of good lessons from what Arizona did. For instance, they have a 5-member commission with 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats, and then they get together and pick a 5th person, kind of a volunteer jury selection style process, a 5th person to be their chair. But they only require 3 votes to pass a map. So if that chair turns out to be a sneaky Republican or a sneaky Democrat, that's the ball game, right? That's not a good structure for a commission.
That's a good structure.
No, I think you need a supermajority. We are proposing a 7-member commission with 5 votes to get it out. So no one's a swing vote. That's a weird thing to do. Even if they're trying, even if it was Gandhi trying to do, it's still a tough position to be in.
And there needs to be vigorous debate.
Yes.
To me. You don't want something so large you can't accomplish anything, and anybody who's been on a board of too many people understand how terrible that is.
Yeah, you don't want 21 members.
No, that you can't do anything. But you need something like the Supreme Court with a certain number of people where there is vigorous debate, but you still have to have a preponderance of people whose opinions align.
Exactly. We don't want a bunch of 4-3 or 5-4 kind of decisions on this. That's not good for the system. That being said, also the biggest thing we need is transparency. Right now, these deals are done in a smoky back room where one politician's saying to the other, can you help protect my district? Or, hey, this guy ran against me last time, it was a tough race. Please carve him out, find a way to do that. And they'll make these deals for each other all the time. If we just bring it out of that smoky back room and you give it to a commission, it instantly becomes FOIA-able, Freedom of Information Act, and you end up with a better process already because there's some sunlight coming down on that thing.
Right, and so this is one of the things that we need to help Virginians understand is what it is what our end game is, which is fair redistricting. And I will have to say, Sam Rasool really made a point of that at a recent meeting, saying if we're going to talk about redistricting, he says the term we need to use is fair. Fair redistricting, because people want what is right, just, and fair. Saying it's nonpartisan or some of these other terms doesn't really get to the heart of the matter.
Correct, yeah.
So in the short term, there might be people who are unhappy, but over the long term, people move around within these districts. People have moved around constantly within these districts. So it's a process. It's about fine-tuning the process, not exactly what we're going to end up with out of the gate.
Yeah, we can't promise outcomes for everybody, but we can promise a fair, even playing field and let the parties, if the Democrats win, if the Republicans win, whatever, as long as the system wasn't rigged in their benefit from the get-go. And that's what we're trying to do, is take this away from the hyper-partisan process and bring it back to a nonpartisan, technocratic approach. Right,
and technology factors into that. Back when we first started doing this, we could not necessarily predict how people were going to vote down to the household, but technology has given us macro data about what people drive and what magazine subscriptions they have and where do they go to the grocery store. And some of this data has made it possible down to houses on a street to predict whether people are going to vote Republican or Democrat.
Absolutely. The amount of data that's available on us individually, first of all, that we voluntarily probably put on Facebook, right? Or that we have, if you can buy a lot of access to it. I mean, they know not just whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. They know whether you're a Bernie Democrat or a Hillary Democrat or a Kasich or a Trump. They also know how likely you are to vote. Right? I mean, now some of that got blown up a couple Tuesdays ago, but generally speaking, they know exactly what your propensity to vote is, so they can plan for the off-year elections we have in Virginia.
And those are tough, the off-year elections, and that was the source of a huge amount of surprise this time around. So when we come back from this break, we're going to be talking with Brian Cannon of OneVirginia2021 about how we go forward with fair redistricting here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, especially now that our governor's race is over. Join us after the break.
Your house a reality. Homeschooling yourself on loans, color-coding listings, and flushing every toilet in a 20-mile radius. If you can ace house hunting, you can do it for retirement. Get on track with tips at aceyourretirement.org.
Here's to the things that can keep us safe. Those we use all the time with hardly a thought. Those that are silently standing by to save our lives. And now, those that we carry with us everywhere we go. Many mobile devices will now bring you wireless emergency alerts, real-time information directly from local sources you know and trust. With the unique sound and vibration, you'll be in the know.
Listen, I realize that I'm not perfect, but it all really started to change because you judge me for having a problem. No one is going to know that I need help. I need help. I know that no one is going to judge me for having a problem. I realize that I'm not perfect, but it all really started to change because you listen.
Family.
Whether it's a short trip or a long haul.
Estimated time, 47 hours.
They will beg.
You're hungry? I'm happy to provide.
They will plead.
Deep fried butter on a stick.
But whatever you do, don't wimp out.
Now you're talking.
Make them buckle up.
He can't hurt.
Remember, safety first. Cheese curls second.
Are you orange?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 116
to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and we are talking about gerrymandering and fair redistricting tonight, and my guest is Brian Cannon. He's the Executive Director of OneVirginia2021. Thank you for being here, Brian.
Catherine, I'm so glad to. This is a good topic.
It is a good topic. There's just so much, I don't even think an hour is going to be enough time to talk about it, but let's talk about when we went off to the break, we were talking about how we know data about certain people's houses.
Yes.
And we can predict how they're going to vote. But sometimes it's even more obvious than data, right? And how legislators will negotiate to carve somebody into a district.
Yeah.
And I think we have a map that shows Senator, what's his name?
I think it's Senator Klein down in North Carolina. This isn't Virginia.
Yeah.
We can make fun of our neighbors to the south for a
Yeah,
second.
this is North Carolina. This is not Virginia, but this map is North Carolina. It basically shows what they did.
Yeah, so in the first image you'll see on the left is the old state Senate district, and you've got the senator has a home, and then apparently he bought a second home. I don't know if he was planning to move to it or if it's a lake home or whatever it was, but he bought a second home. And in the image to the right, you'll see when they did redistricting mid-decade because they got in trouble for racial gerrymandering, they drew the lines to include the senator's new home. And people understand at a level that everything in politics is partisan, and there's a degree of tolerance for that. But what I try to talk to people about is how personal this is. It is incredibly personal to these legislators, and that's what's wrong. Right? That's really the thing that as a gut check really gets people. And I think this map illustrates it perfectly. This isn't about you or me as voters even so much, it's about them as politicians and making sure that this senator stayed in his district. I believe the senator is a Democrat, but he voted for the map as well. It was and North Carolina is controlled by Republicans in this case. So it's a mess and it's highly personal. And I think that's what really offends people, because it's one thing to play politics, it's another thing to do it for personal gain.
You know, and that's interesting because here in Virginia, and again, I'll refer to the documentary Gerry-Rigged, which is on your YouTube channel.
Yes,
so go to YouTube and look for OneVirginia2021. But there were two excellent stories, one about a Republican and one about a Democrat. The Republican was George Allen,
yes,
who was drawn out of his congressional district, and the other was Ward Armstrong.
Yep.
And George Allen, you know, at the end, he had the last laugh, and he who laughs last laughs best. But Ward Armstrong didn't fare so well.
No, they took, when a lot of folks leave the south side of Virginia every decade and move up to Northern Virginia up this way. And so you've got to take some districts from the south side and move it up north. Well, they just so happen to take the only Democratic delegate from the south side and move his 10th House district up north.
Right.
And it's now in Loudoun instead of being in the Danville-Martinsville area. And they targeted Ward Armstrong because he was the Democratic majority leader, because he was a pain in their butt, is what he said, basically.
Yep.
And that level of personal conflict. Now, they did that to a couple other legislators as well. Robin Abbott, Paula Miller down in Hampton
I remember
Roads.
Robin Abbott. Yep.
And these things are just a mess, and that's the level of personalness and pettiness or personal politics that gets put into this redistricting process.
Well, much like the original case of gerrymandering where Monroe and Madison were pitted against each other and Madison prevailed anyway, George Allen was drawn out of his district and was packed into the district of a long-time, well-respected congressman whom he was not going to run against.
Yeah, he didn't.
So somebody goes, hey, I have an idea. Why don't you run for, I don't know, governor?
Yeah, it worked out well for George Allen.
It certainly did. So, you know, people need to be careful what they wish for, because you may not control the outcome. And examples like that should be a warning to people about why we should focus on the process and about fair redistricting. It's not about the individual gains or the individual districts. It's about whether we have a process that is going to deliver the most representative government to the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Yeah, and we can do that just by keeping our communities together. My wife and I chose to live in the city of Richmond. We pay Richmond taxes. We are going to send our child to Richmond Public Schools. We're invested in Richmond City proper. And so that line between Richmond and Chesterfield County, that means something to us. So respecting our communities when you draw these lines is got to be step one, because it should be about the people living there, not about the politicians trying to represent them.
I think one of, and I can't remember his name now, so I should give him credit, but one presentation was about Norfolk, and Norfolk is represented by 9 different people, and only 3 of them live there.
Yes, exactly. Communities, urban areas have this problem all over. My favorite actually is Culpeper, Virginia, which is a little small town in kind of
I know it well.
You know it well, right? It's like, north of Charlottesville. They have 3 state senators.
No.
They don't even have, I mean, you could really just draw a line around them and that'd be one big House of Delegates district, but they have 3 state senators, multiple House of Delegates districts. I mean, the way they carve these communities up ensures virtually no representation. And then if you're on the other side and you're trying to be a good legislator and you're trying to talk to all the school boards and the city councils and the town councils and things like that of all the different communities that are carved up in your district, you're just not going to be able to do that even if you had 28 hours in a day.
I know, and that, and I'm fortunate. I live in Fairfax City.
You guys are whole.
We're whole, and we've got David Bullivant, we got Chap Peterson, and we are not carved up. So
good reform supporters.
We very good. So let's talk a little bit about who's supporting, and more importantly, because this has been raised as a question, who's funding One Virginia 2021? Because I mean, it literally gets right down to, well, I heard that Republicans are giving them money. Well, so are Democrats. So I don't really understand. Because you're nonpartisan.
Yeah.
So
and we're pretty transparent about what we do.
Right. So yeah. So it makes sense that Republicans give you money and Democrats give you money and independents give you money and libertarians give you money. So, what is your answer to people who are like, well, I understand you're funded by Republicans?
Well, yes, right? I would, for the record, if Russians wanted to give us money, or the Koch brothers, or George Soros, anybody, we would take that because that doesn't affect our mission. But that being said, none of those people are giving us any money.
No money,
right?
Okay.
I would love to have that problem. Now, we've got, our biggest donors are Judy Ford Wasson, who's of the Wasson Center for Public Policy.
Was it Christopher Newport University?
Christopher Newport University. She's a long time, she founded the Republican Party at Chesterfield, but she also ran Virginians for Mark Warner and Virginians for Tim Kaine. So I don't know where you consider herself a Republican or
Sounds
Democrat.
like a reasonable woman to me.
She's pretty moderate and independent and is frustrated with both parties at different times. Jim Ukrop, a lifelong Republican who I don't think would necessarily consider his voting record that way anymore. Alan Wurtzel, a longtime Democrat, former CEO of Circuit City. Those are our biggest 3 donors. So they kind of split everywhere. Most of our donors, however, are not of that size. Our average donation, I believe, is $110, even if you include those big donations in there. So most of our donors are people like you and me that are just fed up with this system. I've done a little bit of analysis. It's hard to figure out exactly, but our Republican and Democratic donors, or Republican and Democrats who are in our system and who support us, basically give it the same rate. 1 of 11 out of 13 or so people give to One Virginia, and usually it's like a $20.21 check or reoccurring donation monthly. So we're funded by normal people. I don't have any super secret donors that are, which bias was one way or another. And I think our efforts on redistricting reform, where Republicans and Democrats both carry these bills, reformers on both sides, speaks a lot about who we are and what we're doing.
We know Kim Plum, this again,
one of my heroes.
On the record, he's my hero too, and he's the most senior person in the House of Delegates. It took him 3 tries to get elected to that office. So he always tells people, keep going, keep trying, keep running again. But he says that he had started introducing these bills, or the first bill back in 1988 when Democrats were in charge
I
of the
got to fact check you here. 1982.
82.
The month before I was born, he introduced a redistricting reform bill, and that was back when the Democrats were in the super majority.
Right. So there is sort of this pushback that says, well, you only want redistricting because the Republicans are have the majority in the Senate and then the House. That's why you want these districts. But it's like, no, Ken did it years and years and years ago because he saw decades ago that this was not going to go well.
Absolutely. And on the flip side, you've got like Jill Vogel now in the state Senate who leads the reform effort
very vocal supporter.
Yeah, absolutely. And she's not a moderate Republican. She's a pretty conservative Republican, and she consistently leads our efforts there and speaks out about it everywhere she goes. So you've got really strong, committed people, and it's always frustrating when people are so jaded and skeptical by the system that they don't believe that someone from the other party could want what's good.
It's genuine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We objectify and demonize, and that is really wrong. You don't get things done if you immediately question the motivations of other people.
And if we let this issue of redistricting reform become a left-right issue, we lose. It's really a right-wrong issue, and we need to keep it framed that way, because this isn't about politicians or election results. This is about communities being kept together so they have an opportunity to elect somebody who represents them.
Well, speaking of Jill Vogel, who ran for lieutenant governor and did not prevail, but the governor who won, Ralph Northam, actually is very vocally supporting fair redistricting. Yeah, fair redistricting. So how do you see this shaping up both in the statewide leadership of our newly elected governor, lieutenant governor? Of course, Mark Herring's been re-elected. How do you see this shaping up as we go? Because we're marching toward 2021.
Yeah.
We're marching toward 2021 where someone's going to sign redistricting.
So redistricting will happen. It has to per our Constitution. For the first time ever in Virginia's history, we have a governor who is anti-gerrymandering during the time when it actually matters. Right? We've had some pro-redistricting reform governors before, but they never had the veto pen in a year that ended in 1. And because that's when we do it based on the census data that rolls in, Governor-elect Ralph Northam, then Governor Northam, will have the ability to veto a gerrymandered map. Now, he's been really vocal that he wants it from an independent, nonpartisan commission with good, clear rules and transparency, and that's the kind of map he wants to sign. Otherwise, he said he's going to veto it. I couldn't ask for more. As a reform supporter, that's amazing.
So let's talk about different scenarios. So, you were talking about the fact that you've got a lawsuit in front of the courts right now. So you're looking for a remedy through the court system, testing the legality of how the maps are drawn. We're also a voting rights state. Yes. So explain why we are under scrutiny anyway for our maps, and it has to do with packing districts racially.
Yes, exactly. Now, what happened in 2011 was the Democrats and Republicans both agreed to these maps, so it's a bipartisan problem. But if you look at how it actually impacted the African American communities, it looks really clear. They put as many African Americans into as few districts as possible. So I think a good example of this is Virginia's population is about 20% African American. Now, it's clustered in certain locations in our state, but to some degree, only having one congressional district that had an African American represented it should have been an anomaly. Yet that was the standard in Virginia for almost 30 years that was the case. Now when there was a lawsuit challenging the racial gerrymandering of the 3rd Congressional District, it prevailed, and the special master, the courts, basically drew another map. Lo and behold, we have 2 African American, and 2 out of 11 is a lot closer to the proportion we should be at kind of any given Sunday. I mean, you could imagine every election changes things, but on the whole, Virginia should be about 20% of our congressional delegation should be black, just based on population. Right? And so that helps us there. There's another lawsuit also alleging racial gerrymandering for the House of Delegates districts. There are 12 majority-minority districts in Virginia, mostly from Richmond down to Hampton Roads. And of those 12, 11 are under a federal lawsuit. We'll probably be hearing about that around Christmas or right after the New Year. And hold on, because if you think this year's House of Delegates elections were a big deal, there might be special elections for maybe up to 31 districts come November.
Right, because in addition to the 11, it's every district those 11 touch.
Yep.
So what's that total again?
It's 31 districts.
31 districts. So hypothetically, we could be looking at special elections in 31 districts next year.
Next year.
So join us after the break. We're going to get more good news from Brian Cannon about gerrymandering here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
For all the papas out there, let's stop what we're doing and take a moment to be with our kids. They can be loud moments, goofy moments, dorky moments. It doesn't really matter. Every time dads take a moment to be with their kids, it's pretty momentous. So let's all take a moment to make a moment today.
Hey, did you know that 2.4 million loving cats and dogs in shelters and rescues need our help to find a home? Go to theshelterpetproject.org and search your local shelters and rescues. Go for a cuddle with your next best friend. Adopt.
Okay, so we drowned the fire, stirred it, drowned it again, and now just feel if it's cold.
Yeah.
Cool.
Smokey just gave me a bear hug.
I know. I already posted it.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can stop to make sure someone is okay.
We can warn someone when their drink isn't safe.
And disrupt the situation.
We can.
Get someone a cab.
Or walk them home safely.
We can make campuses safer for our friends.
Our roommates.
Our classmates. Our fellow human beings.
We cannot be bystanders.
We can. Intervene.
It's on us.
All of us.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
When it comes to saving money,
What? Parents!
Don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting.
This is so humiliating.
Be the boss.
I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap.
You were saying.
And make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read.
What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips
We can share.
you obviously didn't go to business school at feedthepig.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking about gerrymandering and fair redistricting here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And joining me is Brian Cannon, Executive Director of OneVirginia2021. So when we departed for our last break, we were talking about the new Congressman, Don McEachin, and the fact that the congressional districts actually are a good example of how it's not representative of how Virginians vote.
Exactly. We're kind of a 50-50 state. Before the special master and the courts redrew the 3rd congressional district and all the districts that touched it, Virginia had 8-3 Republican representation, which is a little strange.
Right, 50-50 Republican-Democrat, 8 Republicans, 3 Democrats.
Yeah.
What does that tell us about gerrymandering?
A little bit of it is due to residential sorting. Liberals live in Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Norfolk and such like that. But a degree of which, if you look at these maps, that would be abundantly clear or abundantly true if it were, and the only thing that were true if they were keeping those communities together. But if you look what they did, and when they first drew those congressional maps to all of those communities I mentioned, they carve them up very precisely. So it's a very artificial rig in favor of the Republicans, and you know that's what they did. Actually, they did it in 2012 to their benefit. So when the courts unwound some of that, you naturally have another Democratic district emerge, which is, you know, generally speaking, you don't have to have proportional representation, but you want it to be somewhat reflective of the population as a whole. I mean, that's why we hold these elections and people vote, not politicians.
So in the 10th congressional district is a good example, just talking about gerrymandering, because on one end is McLean, and generally the representative for that congressional district has always been on the McLean end, but it goes across the top of Virginia all the way to West Virginia.
Yeah. And you got to think about how those people in the, you know, in Winchester and stuff like that, how do they feel represented by someone from McLean?
Which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. Come on, let's be serious.
It's exactly the opposite. And the 5th congressional district is my current favorite one. That goes all the way from Fauquier County, all the way down to Danville in the North Carolina-Virginia line. How do you represent something like that?
I know.
Right? And it's just, and they're not drawn to represent people, and that's just abundantly clear when you look at them.
So this is one of the things that we really need to ignite Virginians to, first of all, understand that simply, and you've got a petition drive going on.
Yes.
I know, because I've collected petitions for OneVirginia2021.
Thank you.
Asking people to understand that they are voters. They live here. They can demand that we do it differently.
Yes.
I mean, as voters, we don't have to wait for it to be a referendum. People and the grassroots activism of this last election should buoy everybody into believing that if you want change, you can make change.
Yep.
So tell us about Wendy Goditis, who's a brand new delegate-elect.
Yeah, so I first met her, I was 6 or 7 months ago, right after she declared. I was speaking at an event on gerrymandering up in Leesburg, and she came and said, "Hi, I'm Wendy, I'm running for office." And I'm like, "Great, where are you running?" And she said, "I'm running against, in the 10th district against Delegate Randy Minshew," which is interesting because Delegate Randy Minshew was actually the first Republican delegate in the House in this kind of cycle of redistricting reform, so in the past 4 years, to vote for redistricting reform. So we were a big fan of what he was doing, and then he actually carried reform legislation. But last year, or last January, he was actually the vote in a subcommittee, the swing vote in a subcommittee to kill redistricting reform. I don't know how else to say it. He flip-flopped on the issue, right? It's really unfortunate. He has some reasons for it, but at the end of the day, he helped kill the bill that he was helping to sponsor just the year before. Wendy found out about that. Wendy found out about that flip-flop, and she said that's what motivated her to run. So it's really exciting to think that we're getting the word out there, people are listening, and that it's gone from what a lot of folks say was an insider baseball issue to the ethical issue in our politics. Because I think this is really a great way to measure whether your politician is ethical or not. Do they support fair and independent redistricting? Or do they like the status quo where the system's rigged for incumbents?
Exactly, and I think when you talk about, and again, Sam Rasool, when he was talking about fair redistricting, said, we might lose some seats, the Democratic Party might lose some seats in the short term, but there are gains in the long term. And we also have to understand that people are going to move around. I mean, there's a lot of movement within the state. You know, people sort themselves out. Culturally, they sort themselves out. Socioeconomically, they sort themselves out. Age-wise, they sort themselves out. So, you know, if we want fair redistricting, we have to draw what makes sense to keep communities intact and together. And depending on moving in or moving out, it's going to take a while for it to sort itself out.
Yeah, and if the community is red, they should be electing Republicans. If it's blue, they should be electing Democrats. And if it's purple, which there are plenty of places in Virginia that are, they should have some competitive elections. And so we shouldn't be making that decision artificially for people the way we do now, where they're rigging out competition from the system. If we just keep communities together, they'll do what they're supposed to do, which is elect people that represent them.
So these elections were very interesting because 15 incumbent Republicans were unseated.
Yeah, this was a
it was wave. A wave. It was a wave, and I've heard lots of different people speak about the fact that they think that it was the surge of voters that don't normally vote in delegate races. It was up from 42% 2 years ago to 47%, which means that 5% was what moved these districts.
Very much so.
So there might be a reaction to say, well, then gerrymandering is not a problem because look what the Democrats did. So how could it be a problem? But we should not be lulled into complacency over this very unique sort of wave.
Sure. Here's what I would say. I would say wave elections should matter. Whether it's an R wave or a D wave, whatever it is, a wave election should make a difference. What we're looking for is 2 years ago, Republicans got 54% of the vote for the House of Delegates, and Democrats got about 44%. And 2 years ago, that 54% for Republicans, that wave mattered. They got 66 seats out of 100. The wave election this year for Democrats got 54% of the vote, but they only ended up with likely 49 seats out of 100.
So
it's a weird place to be in a democratic republic where one side's wave election doesn't matter. That's a real, and let me be clear, to a degree, some of that is residential sorting where Democrats live on top of each other.
Right.
The Wisconsin case before the Supreme Court is a great example of this. And they measure the degree of partisan gerrymandering, and then also measure the degree of residential sorting. In Virginia, ours is about 5%. So a wave election at 54% of the vote should produce somewhere around 55 to 60 seats, and it's going to produce about 49 seats.
Well, see, and that's a good example. That's what people really need to understand is the mathematics, because a lot of this really is math. And this is what I kept saying about some of these districts. You know, people were so hopeful about Danica-Rome, for instance, in Bob Marshall's district. And I'm like, it seems to me mathematically, you know, some people have to stay home or vote Democratic, because even if you could pull out every Democrat, the way the district was drawn, I wasn't, you know, I just didn't think the math would work otherwise. But then it turns out the Richmond Times-Dispatch had a map that they published yesterday of the biggest changes and where each candidate had their highest percentage. But Manassas had the biggest swing from Democratic vote in the last House of Delegate race to this one. The largest of any place in Virginia was Manassas. Well, guess whose district that's in? Danica-Rome's. Okay. So this is very interesting, and this was by precinct, by the way. This map that the Richmond Times-Dispatch did was by precinct. They did some really good
work on covering the aftermath of this election.
And I think VPAP.org did, and I think that the Wasson Center, because Quentin Kidd spoke at the Democratic Business Council of Northern Virginia's breakfast last Friday and was talking about the results. So people are slicing and dicing and picking it apart to look at what the changes really were. But the city that had the highest voter turnout was Richmond. Congratulations. Yes, 66.9% of the vote. That was the highest turnout of any city in Virginia, but that's still less than 70% of registered voters.
It's sad to be celebrating 66%, but we'll take it. I hope people leave this conversation from us not thinking that this, just because I'm personally a Democrat, that I want Democrats to win out of this. What I really want is that elections to matter, right? That's all we're looking for. So there was a Democratic wave year. That should matter for Democrats. If the inverse is true, then it should matter for Republicans. If people in communities just get together and make their choices, we'll be in a much better place, because you look at all these public policy issues where 70% of Virginians want X, but the General Assembly won't do X, they're going to do Y. And you wonder why, what on earth is going on? It's because we don't have an electorate that is, or a General Assembly that's always reflective of Virginians, and it takes a tidal wave of election like we just had to barely maybe make a difference in that. It's a weird place to be when incumbents are protected so thoroughly, and on both sides of the aisle.
both sides, because they negotiate, which is why I think that having this independent commission cannot be a group of legislators, just a smaller group. I don't see how that can work.
It shouldn't be lobbyists either, right? Or their spouses, right?
No.
Keep all three of those kind of people out of the game.
To me, it seems like, and I don't have the answer, but I will say this. For the people who are like, it will never be truly nonpartisan, I reject that as the reason not to do anything, because it can be a lot better and a lot more fair than it is today, regardless if it's ever perfectly nonpartisan.
Almost anything could be better than what we have today. And we can learn the lessons from California and Arizona, who I wouldn't suggest we replicate here in Virginia. But let me tell you this, as much as I wouldn't impose California's system on Virginia, the average margin of victory for a state house seat in California was 37 points before redistricting reform. Wow. So the average person won with a 37% margin. I mean, that's insane.
It is insane.
After they had redistricting reform, and I don't think theirs is perfect either, but it went down to 10%.
And that's reasonable.
That's
10%.
Totally reasonable, right? And Democrats end up winning a lot in California, but that's because it's pretty blue. But there are huge Republican supporters in California of the redistricting reform, not just Arnold Schwarzenegger, but other folks as well, who say this helped the Republican Party because they actually had to compete in districts that were purple. Right? And they lost some of them, but they won some of them, and that's exactly how the chips.
And some of the leadership, surprisingly, has come from Republican governors.
Yeah.
John Kasich is one.
Yep.
Arizona governor.
Oh, Janet Brewer was not a fan of this. I wouldn't give you Arizona.
But they are a Republican-controlled state.
Yes.
And they're the ones who brought before the Supreme Court asking if it was constitutional to have an independent commission. It came from Arizona.
It came from Arizona. No, I would say that Republican governors like John Kasich out of Ohio, who said that gerrymandering belongs in the dustbin of history, which I love. Governor Larry Hogan in Maryland, to our north, pushing for that. And I've talked to the folks on that commission. One of them is actually from the Cato Institute. So let's not leave out libertarians and Greens. I mean, a lot of other folks want redistricting reform just because we want a level playing field, not because it's going to rig it for one side or the other. There are really good solutions out there. Doesn't mean we have to replicate all of them here in Virginia. I hope we come up with a Virginia way. Our job right now is to listen. We've got proposals. We've had proposals for years, but we really want to listen to these new legislators, listen to some of the old legislators that might be looking at things a little differently now. I think if you're a Republican in the House of Delegates and you don't see shades of what Democrats saw in 1997 when they used to have control and then were slowly losing it, now's the time to make fair rules while you're in the majority. And so I hope Republicans listen to that, because Republicans in the Senate get it. That the Senate flip-flops all the time, and Republicans in the Senate have been some of the best leaders on redistricting reform.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what happens. There's a lot going on, and when we come back from our break, I just want to question you about things like split precincts, because that could ultimately end up affecting the makeup of our House of Delegates this year. And so I'm going to talk to Brian in our last segment about split precincts and how he foresees us going forward with this brand new mix of people in the House who support fair redistricting. Please join us after the break.
Guess what? I have some news for you. There's free food right there, junk food. You see that truck? Oh, jeez. It's a 2 Michelin star chef. All for free, ladies and gentlemen. All for free.
Here we have a panzanella with summer vegetables and pesto. Enjoy. How we doing?
Fantastic. So what do you got going on underneath that plate there?
This food is really about to be thrown away.
Yeah.
Is there something wrong with this food? Where did you get it from?
From farmers markets. They put aside the ugly vegetables and the ugly fruits.
Carrot top, soft avocados. It was all food that was going to be discarded.
Even the drink you had is made from like a little bruised peach. Did it taste a little bruised?
Great. It's good.
The average person throws away 24 pounds of food a month.
That's a lot.
Isn't that a lot? Go visit savethefood.com for more information. Thank you. Junk food time!
we're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight I'm talking with Brian Cannon of OneVirginia2021 about fair redistricting. So, in our final segment, Brian, let's talk about today's headlines in the Richmond Times-Dispatch about split precincts. What in the world happened in District 28 and District 88?
So, District 28 and 88 are sort of in Fredericksburg and sort of in Stafford County, which, basically they carve up Fredericksburg down the middle. Like every college town basically gets carved up. Mary Washington gets carved up in that regard. And there were split precincts, which means the YMCA or the church or the school or whatever where we all go to vote, I might get one ballot for a House of Delegates race, and you might get another ballot for another House of Delegates race. And so that's a confusing thing for our electoral board to even have to deal with. Our registrars trying to sort out who gets the right ballots. But split precincts are a creature of partisan politicians dividing up our communities for their benefits. There's no reason to have a split precinct. There's no reason we can't keep a community whole enough to represent a small little precinct in a town. Yet here we are. Allegedly, a number of voters, and we're talking probably enough to make a difference in this in the House District 28, which is Speaker household seat. The theory is that enough of those voters were given the wrong ballot completely, so they didn't have a chance to vote. I mean, that's a real mess. I mean, that's a real problem.
It is, and so now they're looking at remedies.
Yeah.
Special election. Are we going to let the courts decide? This is like the hanging Chad of 2017.
Yeah.
It really is. It's kind of like, is a court going to decide whether those matter or they don't matter?
Fredericksburg is our West Palm Beach county, right? It's a mess, and this isn't how we want to resolve elections. You want elections that people have faith in, that we have confidence in when we cast our vote, that it's counted, that we got the right ballot to begin with. I mean, this is a real sad part. It doesn't have to be this way, right? That district was carved that way to protect the speaker and to protect his neighbor Mark Cole, who's in the 88th district. I mean, that was why they drew this, and to make sure that a Democrat didn't have a chance to win in Fredericksburg. That's not a good reason to do it. That's certainly not helpful to the people in Fredericksburg, and certainly not helpful for the nice women and men who run the elections trying to get it right. There's a high margin for error in this, and I think we hit a big rock on this one.
So do you think, though, that what happened with 28 and 88 is a rallying cry for people to get involved who may not otherwise have gotten involved? Can you can OneVirginia2021 hold this up as a tangible example of what went wrong, why it's wrong, and why we don't ever want this to happen again?
Absolutely, and we are glad to talk about split precincts. The number in Virginia of split precincts we have from the last redistricting cycle from 2001 was about 75 split precincts. That's a lot.
75 split precincts?
Yes.
I had no idea.
75 around the Commonwealth. So what happened in Fredericksburg is unfortunately more the rule than an anomaly. But after the latest round of redistricting in 2011, that number tripled. We now have 224 split precincts around Virginia. I mean, every other precinct is split. It's a real mess.
224.
224. And not only is this a mess to administer locally, it also costs us about $10 million extra to get more voting machines in, things like that. That's a whole nother. Gerrymandering is expensive, so is the litigation defending it, defending the status quo. But there are even precincts that are split in Newport News. There are 2 precincts in Newport News that are split for the House of Delegates 3 ways. I studied election laws in law school. I didn't even know you could do that, but they are. And it's a real mess. It's confusing for voters. You don't know who your delegate is. It doesn't help representation, but it's not the end-all be-all problem, but it's a real hallmark of a gerrymandered district is a ton of split precincts. Now, some Republicans in the House of Delegates will say, well, we put in bills to clean up these split precincts in Fredericksburg. And they're right. They totally did. Governor McAuliffe vetoed them. I think I would say back that you didn't try to clean up the split precincts in Newport News or in Charlottesville or in any other place. We should clean up all the split precincts in Virginia, and we should have a process that doesn't get us that way in the first place.
Wow. So is that something that has to wait until 2021 to solve? What can be done within the 10 years
Yeah, so usually we have what are called technical adjustments to these precincts. Governor McAuliffe has taken the stance that Virginia can only redistrict in years ending in 1, so even a technical adjustment can't happen. That's a perfectly logical interpretation of the law. There are others who believe that you can make technical adjustments, and just because it says you shall only redistrict in years ending in 1 doesn't mean you can't in years ending in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. What we would be careful with is we don't want mid-decade redistricting.
Right.
We don't want to open that can of worms where all of a sudden one party takes control in a year ending in 5 and decides, you know what, we're going to redistrict the whole state. That's not what we want. But technical adjustments and cleaning these up for localities, as long as you're not doing it to benefit one party or another or one politician, seem like a reasonable thing we should be doing.
But you probably are not looking at technical adjustments to those 224 split precincts before 2021.
Probably not, unfortunately. It's a real mess, but that would be wholesale redistricting, pretty much, if you cleaned it up all around the state.
But let's look at this. It's 4 years away, which is really, in the history of the world, 4 years, not long at all. So these are examples of why people should be concerned. 224 split precincts, and the fact that it's affecting this election now is incredible. Mm-hmm. The gerrymandered districts, we've got congressional races coming up next year in 2018. Bob Goodlatte has decided not to run, but there have people who've said to me, it's too gerrymandered for a Democrat to even win in the 6th congressional district. Too gerrymandered, can't win it, not possible. This is not democracy.
Isn't it sad it discourages competition?
It
right?
is.
If you draw a district to benefit an incumbent politician, then any rational, sane human being is going to say, I don't know if I want to put myself and my family and my career through that.
Trust me, I've asked around. I've asked people, I'm like, you should run in the 6th. They're like, no, you can't win it, can't win it.
Yeah.
That is not democracy. That is not a representative form of government. Our government should reflect how people are voting in their communities at the congressional level. So in 2 years, back in 2019, we'll have both the Senate and the House. Mm-hmm. And again, I think what some people are hoping is that if we have a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic governor, there's a possibility of passing legislation. I mean, I like to think that too, but that's just me. But how can people, average Virginians, get involved to try to turn this around, including pressuring their own representative, no matter what party they're in?
Yeah.
Constituents banging on the door, knocking on the door, making phone calls, showing up saying, I don't want legislators to redraw these lines.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's exactly where everyone needs to be. But let me rewind for a second. If Democrats take control of the whole thing, I'm just as concerned about getting reform as I am if Republicans do. If you want to know what Democrats do when they have unilateral control, see Maryland, right? If you want to know what Republicans do when they have unilateral control, see North Carolina. So both parties do it. So people from all sides of the aisle have to stand up for this and say enough is enough. We've got to fix the system. The good news is that on Tuesday, a lot of people who stood up to say, I want to end gerrymandering in Virginia, got elected, including to the governor's mansion, a lot to the House of Delegates. We lost some support there who did as well, but net, it was a positive gain for redistricting reform in the General Assembly. We're closer than ever before. Doesn't mean the road is any easier, but we're closer than we have before. But what I will say is what really drives this organization and this whole movement are people standing up for redistricting reform. If they put it up on the screen, there's this wonderful picture of Bill Millhauser, who's one of our organizers here in Fairfax. He's got a sign that says, "You've been gerrymandered," right? Which is
I have one of those signs.
You have one of those signs?
I take my sign with me. I do, in the back of my car, and I take it all over the place, and I give presentations about gerrymandering.
So we've had those originally made for people to work the polls, but people have taken them all over. Bill and a bunch of folks went to the October 3rd Supreme Court hearing of the Wisconsin gerrymandering case. It's probably the biggest gerrymandering case to come before SCOTUS in a decade or more. And they were there protesting, and that picture of Bill got on the New York Times website. Wow. I was so proud. I was like, those are our people. Go. Right? And this is just, an average citizen standing up and saying, you know what, I want to get involved. I want to help. I want to organize. In fact, if you want to help, OneVirginia2021.org/help. and there is, right, and we try to make it easy, and there's a little survey people can fill out and saying what types of help we need and maybe what they can provide. We've got over 1,000, probably about 1,500 volunteers around the state, and everybody does things from data entry to going to protests to collecting signatures at farmers markets and at polling places. It's a real grassroots movement because, politicians are going to want to do this as long as we let them get away with it.
Right. I think too, and I have spoken to the League of Women Voters, I've spoken in bookstores. I think the other way that people can help is become an expert on fair redistricting and gerrymandering and speak to the Kiwanis and the Rotary, because this is a nonpartisan organization. This is not political. There's a lot of organizations like, well, we can't do any kind of political work. This is not political work. This is the core values of democracy. And I do think that wherever there are people who meet regularly and have speakers, people should step up like I do, and volunteer to go out and talk to groups about why they should care about this issue. You know, I tell people all the time, you may not think that this is the most important issue we need to solve, but it's the first issue we need to solve before we can solve all of the other ones.
We have an honest discussion. Yeah, I speak at Rotaries all the time. I'm a former Rotarian before I took this job and traveled all over. Redistricting reform passes the four-way test, right? And I think that's the perfect way to look at it for Rotarians. And
that's great.
Right?
That's great.
You're welcome to use that next time you speak to them.
I'm going to do that.
It's wonderful to have people engaged at a civic level on the fundamentals of our democracy. I mean, the first thing that ever got me to even care about politics was John McCain running in 1999, railing about campaign finance reform. And that was one of those issues that I thought, man, if we can't clean up the money in politics, what are we even talking about the other issues that are going on?
True,
right? And I think the same thing is true about gerrymandering. The good news is that while campaign finance reform had a First Amendment buzzsaw coming for it, right, in the form of Citizens United and McDonald v. SEC and all those things like that, there's no First Amendment protection for politicians to gerrymander. So we fix this, we get it right. There's no Supreme Court that's going to hem back our ability to fix this. This is a state issue. Virginians are standing up to take care of it, and hopefully we'll get a solution for 2021. At least I know we have a governor who is going to veto any gerrymandered maps, which is a great place to be.
Yeah, so I encourage people to get involved too. You've got a Twitter account. It's the number 1 VA 2021.
Yes, had to keep it short before they gave us 280 characters.
Right, you've got a Facebook page, you've got the YouTube channel. And again, I think the YouTube channel is great because if people subscribe every time you post something new materials, another gerrymandering commercial, those are great, that people get a notice that says, hey, there's new material out on the YouTube channel. So these are all ways that people can get involved. And I think really people should get involved.
Yeah, just a little bit of time educating yourself on this and you can be an expert. I always tell people, like, how did you get involved in redistricting reform? I'm like, I studied it in law school. The good news is in this field, no one knows about it. So, right, so it doesn't take a lot of expertise to be an expert in this field. I mean, you can really jump in and we need you. We need everybody.
Well, I really appreciate you being here. You have shed light on this. I think of you as the voice of redistricting here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Thank you.
I think the organization is named appropriately, OneVirginia2021. That was brilliant. And so I hope people will get involved, visit your website, and Lobby Day. Come down to session because check out the website. Lobby Day is one of the best times to join with other people from around Virginia.
We're probably going to have a couple of days for that, so stay tuned.
We absolutely will stay tuned. And thank you so much again for being here. Join us next time on Inside Scoop and think about fair redistricting here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.